Hello and welcome to the Pinwheels pregame show. I'm Mitchell Kaminski. Thank you for joining us. As a reminder, QR code up top. Get yourself a shirt. This show is sponsored by Homage and also tonight, Pinwheels and Ivy. The normal show will be on 8 o'clock. Aldo and Zoe will be on to talk all things White Sox and Cubs. We're going to start today's show. We'll get into the White Sox for a second, but obviously some sad news in the baseball world last night. Willie Mays passed away. I never got the privilege to watch Willie Mays play, but you know his importance. I've been to Cooperstown, been to the Negro League Hall of Fame, and one of the highest compliments I think you can pay him is you really cannot tell the story of baseball without Willie Mays. And the first thing that comes to mind is obviously that great, like when you think Willie Mays, like that great over the shoulder catch that you always see in the highlight reels where he's running backwards and, basket catch, incredible catch. And the thing that gets overlooked, I think the most about that play is how quickly he got the ball in afterwards, because he's off balance, had to turn around and fire that thing in. That was like one of the more impressive things to me that was overlooked. So in honor of Willie Mays, we're going to look just a couple stats that show just how good he was, because when you're looking at his baseball reference page, it's incredible. The first thing that kind of jumped out to me, actually my dad sent me this, in his 24 years playing, he only hit into 45 double plays. Like, think about that. Like Andrew Vaughn, it feels like, hits into 45 in a week. Willie Mays in 24 years, he only hit into 45 double plays. That's wild. Now, for his career, too, career WAR 156.2, which they didn't really keep WAR back then, like early on in his career. So that's an incredible stat. 660 home runs, a 301 lifetime batting average. If you go to the end of his career, because he had one season, like I think when you think Willie Mays, because obviously, especially for the people that didn't get to watch him play, you think of the speed and the defense, but he had a season where he led the league with 51 home runs. He had another season he had 52. And he was a threat on the base pass too. And this was a day and age where it like wasn't as easy as it is to steal bases now. But like you look at the end of his career, when he was 40 years old, he had a season where he stole 23 bases. Like that's insane. And even when he was kind of starting to decline in his later years, where like the numbers were kind of going down in the early 70s, he had a year where he had an OBP of 400, even though he was his batting average, wasn't that great that year. I think he hit like 250 that season, and I believe it was 1971. But just an incredible player. He was supposed to be at Rickwood Field. They're going to honor him there for their first Negro League Classic game. They had the MILB version last night when that news broke. The Birmingham Barons are playing Edgar Quiro, side note, 5 for 5 in that game. But Will, obviously, like I said, you really cannot, you can't tell the story of baseball without Willie Mays. So rest in peace to the legend. Moving on to the White Sox world. Last night, Jonathan, I know it's kind of the trendy thing right now to be dumping on the White Sox and be negative about the White Sox. And there's a lot of things to be negative about, so I don't blame anyone for doing that. And usually these shows are mostly negative because there's not a whole lot of positives to talk about. But, we're going to take a look at some positives with this team, because there's a couple things that have popped up that have been really good to see. Jonathan Cannon, he pitched last night against the Astros, 8.2 shutout innings. He was just 1 out away from a complete game shutout, which is really hard if you think about it in today's day and age with just like pitch counts and the bullpens. You really don't see it anymore. It really is kind of rare. Last time the White Sox had a complete game shutout was when Dylan Cease had his near no-hitter against the Twins in 2022. So it's been a while since the Sox had a complete game shutout. Cannon came close. I actually really like how Pedro Grifol handled that situation. He gave the kid a shot to get that complete game shutout. Despite it still being a pretty close game, he was nearing 100 pitches. Pedro still let him go out there, gets the first 2 outs. They get some weak hit. It was kind of on like a check swing that gets through. So now you got the tying runs at the plate. And Pedro still let him, hey, we'll give you another chance to kind of finish what you started. Then you get the tying run on first base, winning or go-ahead run at the plate, and that's when he finally made the move. So I actually think he handled that well. I'm glad he gave him a shot at it, and he gave him a little bit of a leash. But with the pitch count that high, he'd never thrown that many pitches before in his MLB career. I think probably in his professional career, I would imagine. He was over 106 or so. It was kind of, it was getting up there. So, just props to him though. What really impressed me too, when you look at that box score, so he had 4 strikeouts, but he really pounded the strike zone and he gave up 7 hits. But the 7 hits is a little deceiving. It sounds like a lot more than it is. 3 of those hits were really, a lot of those were like soft contact. There was one that was like a bloop single that kind of dropped in front of Robert. And I think if Robert got a better jump on it, he probably catches that ball. And then the 2 in the 9th inning was on a check swing where the defense was shifted. So it kind of was like an oops single down the line where there was no one there. And then one soft single up the middle. All of his pitches have a lot of movement on it, even his fastball. And that's the one thing, the difference between him and Thorpe. And Thorpe got roughed up earlier this week, but you want to let these guys grow. So I'm not too concerned about that. But like the difference between them, the Thorpe we were kind of talking about last week is because his fastball sits in the low 90s. It's kind of like an interesting combination with his changeup because he has to get ahead in the count. Cannon throws in the mid 90s. He's got 95, so he's got a little bit more wiggle room to escape some of these situations because he throws so hard and all of his pitches move. He can throw that sweeper away from righties. He can throw that sinker inside to righties. He's got a knuckle curve that moves really well. His changeup's got good movement. Like the kid, even when he misses his spots, and that's the thing I noticed, he gets away with a lot of mistakes because there's so much movement. He'll hang like a sweeper over the plate and he'll get away with it. It'll just be a lot of soft contact, and he challenges hitters because they have that much movement. Even the ones he makes mistakes on, he gets away with them. Now, we did see against his last start against Seattle, where he threw 7 innings. They only gave 1 run. That 1 run came on a homer because he left one kind of over the plate. So he does tend to make mistakes from time to time, but I really like the fact that things didn't go great. He had a good debut, and there was some potential you could see there. Kind of got roughed up, though, and the White Sox sent him down. They wanted him to work on stuff. So that's kind of a tough situation. It's not easy getting your first taste of big league action, and then you got to get sent back down and told to work on stuff. So the fact that he was able to apply some of the stuff he learned, or the Sox told him, hey, these are the stuff we want to work on. Pedro Grifol said after the game, he's like, yeah, he checked all the boxes we wanted to see from the minors, and now he's applying it. Corey Lee was also talking about just how studious he is. He really does a good job preparing before each start and studying. He's a work. He puts a lot into it, which is nice to see. We got Southside Deach in the comments. Kamen being able to spot 5 pitches regularly makes him potentially lethal after getting in the Banny Cat Slap. I agree. And, it's funny when you mentioned Brian Bannister, too, because if you kind of look at the way he throws, Brian Bannister famously you worked with Logan Webb, helped make him into the ace he was today. I talked about this on a previous show where Bannister, that the sweeper that Eric Fetty throws, he learned that in the same pitching lab that Logan Webb was at in the offseason so they kind of throw similar type sweepers. But Cannon, if you look at his delivery, is a little bit similar. There's little similarities to Logan Webb. I was watching Webb pitch with the Giants because they were playing the Cubs, and there is some similarities between the two and the kind of just their styles and their delivery. And Bannister's been an underrated asset with the pitching, because I actually think, as bad as the White Sox record's been, the pitching's been overall outside of the bullpen, but like you see some flashes where it's like kind of starting to come together. So, props to Cannon. I want to see a couple, he has to string a couple more of these good starts together, but the last 2 have been very, very promising. I think the Sox got something with this guy. I'm cautiously optimistic. Now I'm very pro player. I've been, quick to jump on some bandwagons too early. So, being cautiously optimistic this time, but yeah, I really like the way he's throwing the ball. Now, the one thing that does concern me with him, the same day as he was throwing, Mike Clevenger was doing his rehab start. So it'll be interesting to see once he's done, because they're kind of lining up on the same days, who gets sent down when Clevenger returns. I've talked about this before too. I hated that Clevenger signing. Obviously, you have the baggage, but like he's blocking a spot for one of these other young guys from learning, like a Nastrini or a Thorpe or a Cannon. And now one of those guys is going to have to probably get sent down for Clevenger, who you can't really trade, I would imagine. I don't know what team's going to be wanting a Mike Clevenger at this point, especially since he's been injured and he's been down in the minor leagues trying to rehab. And the starts he has had, the body of work, hasn't all been that impressive because he's been trying to work his way up. So we'll see how they handle it. The Deach thinks they're going to go to a 6-man rotation. I could see it. Maybe especially with Crochet, maybe they want to give him some extra rests, but I really hope that Cannon's not the one that's sent down, because Sox fans would have a legitimate reason to be very pissed off if that was the case. Now, kind of going along those lines, though, there was one guy that got sent down this week in Jordan Leisure. And Leisure's been a guy that looked really good early. He's a guy we got from the Dodgers last year in that last Lynn trade. He looked really good in spring training, looked really good early on in the season. A lot of people speculating, including myself, hey, this guy could be the future closer. Like, he was in some pretty big spots early on. One of the ones that stood out to me was White Sox in April. They're in Kansas City, and there's a really big moment in the first game of that series. They're losing. It's still the game's within reach. They're down by 3 runs. They bring Cannon in to a bases or a high pressure situation. Cannon gives up a base hit on kind of like a softball that kind of like, like Kansas City special, for lack of a better word, like as Hawk Harrelson would say, that kind of drops in there. So now the bases are loaded. Bobby Witt Jr. comes to the plate. The entire crowd starts standing up. This is a big moment for a kid kind of getting his first taste of action in a hostile environment. One of the better hitters in baseball is at the plate, and Cannon got out of the jam. So I was like, okay, like this kid, he's got some poise. So he gets sent down, and a lot of people were upset about that. I don't really have an issue with it, though, because kind of similar with what we saw with Cannon. Like, hey, look, we want him to work on some stuff. We think it would be better for his development and his confidence if he worked on that in Charlotte, and he'll be back up. So I actually didn't really have an issue with them sending him down. They were putting him in a lot of really bad spots just because they don't have a whole ton of weapons in that bullpen. So I think they were asking a lot out of the kid. And, the results just haven't quite been there recently. So I'm fine with them sending him down to Charlotte, work on some stuff, come back up. I got no issue with that. We saw that with Nastrini too, and it was really beneficial for him, kind of similar with Cannon. We're like, hey, got roughed up early, sent him down to work on some stuff, comes back, and he's looked a lot better as of late. So didn't really have an issue with that one. Kind of going back to last night's start, another thing, a moment in that game was Corey Lee guns down a guy at second base. Once again, it seems like each week you'll see some sort of highlight of Corey Lee nailing a runner at second base. One of the best pop times in baseball. I think it's a 1.7, sub 2 for sure. So it's one of the better ones in baseball. How we doing, Andy, in the comments? Good to see you. But yeah, so what's so impressive about with Corey Lee in that defense is how easy it is to steal bases nowadays. Like, the White Sox have always historically had problems holding runners on. Some of that's on the catcher, and Grandal had a horrible pop time. A lot of that's on the pitchers. They just didn't, the White Sox would routinely be leading the league in the most stolen bases allowed. So the fact that Lee has been throwing runners out at such a high clip is really impressive, just from the fact that the White Sox aren't very good at it. Their pitchers historically don't hold runners on very well. And then you add in the fact that stealing a base in today's game is easier than it's ever been. You're not allowed to throw, as many pickoffs as you want to hold a runner on base. It'll make it a lot tougher. You can only throw over 3 times. And that third time, you better throw them out. So you throw over twice, that runner knows, hey, like, I can take a big lead and just take off for second base here. Because if he throws over again, it's, I'm saying it's going to be a ball. So that's for number one. Number two, the bases are bigger. So the distance getting there is shorter. And number three, the athletes are just, bigger, stronger, faster than they've ever been. So stealing bases is just, you see these high stolen base numbers. So the fact that Corey Lee's been able to throw runners out at such a high clip, really, really impressive. I hope he continues to get more stuff. Pedro keeps saying that, like, there's some stuff we want him to still work on and, like, check some more boxes, which is why they keep playing Maldonado. I go back to what Ozzy said last week. I think he brought up a good point. He said that he believes Pedro might be scared of Maldonado just because of how many years he's been in the league, and he's been a veteran, and Pedro kind of appears like he doesn't really know what he's doing. So I actually think that's the best excuse I can come up with for why he keeps getting so many starts. But Corey Lee, another guy that's been, especially in the defensive end, really, really, really good for the White Sox. So good to see from both of them. Hopefully Cannon can keep this momentum going moving forward. So that was good to see. Another roster move that they made, this one kind of threw under the radar, a little bit of more of a minor one, but kind of goes back to the catching situation. So they designate Duke Ellis for assignment. Now, Duke Ellis, we talked about when they called him up, 26-year-old. He was in Birmingham, plays really good defense, got a lot of speed. He was 4 for 4 in stolen base attempts up in the major leagues. Unfortunately, his brief 8-game stint kind of highlighted by getting picked off at second base at Wrigley Field in the 9th inning when he represented the tying run, and then dropping that fly ball against Boston, which was his first error of the season, by the way. He usually makes these routine plays. So that was kind of surprising. And it was an out that would have ended the game. They ended up winning the game anyway, but it was just kind of a funny moment. So Duke Ellis gets DFA'd. The White Sox kind of hoping he clears waivers so they can bring him back, because I still think they do like him. And that'll be interesting to see if a team does pick up Duke Ellis, just because he's kind of like a discount Billy Hamilton almost. Like later in his career where he plays really good defense, he can steal bases. So if you're a contending team, that's kind of a nice weapon to have late in games. Obviously, the stint with the White Sox didn't go great. I would imagine he clears waivers, but that's going to be intriguing to see. But as part of the reason why they DFA'd him is because they had to add Chucky Robinson to the 40-man roster. Now, those of you who've never heard of Chucky Robinson before, White Sox signed him to a minor league deal this offseason. He kind of got a brief taste of MLB action with the Cincinnati Reds, but he's really been a career minor leaguer for the most part. He's a catcher. He hit really good in the minors last year. I think he was around like 14 home runs or so, hitting the high like 280, I want to say. So he had a little bit of pop. He had a really good spring training too. Offensive numbers haven't quite been there yet. So why did the White Sox add him to the 40-man roster? Well, Chucky Robinson, he had a clause in his contract that said if he was not added to the 40-man roster at a certain date, he could opt out and hit free agency. So you might be asking yourself, like, why would the White Sox care, especially if this guy's a minor leaguer who's not been hitting particularly good in AAA? Like, you look at his numbers right now, I think he was hitting like 226, and not particularly impressive. He had 25 RBIs, I think, last I checked, and 6 home runs, I want to say. So, not terrible as far as the power numbers go at this point in the season, but not, definitely nothing special. His defense isn't great. So it's like, why would the White Sox care? And then Pedro's like, yeah, we really value him. We think he's an important piece down there. If you read between the lines of what's really happening, the White Sox don't think Hero's ready. If you're looking at the depth chart, Max Stassi out for the year. So outside of Maldonado and Lee, Chucky Robinson's the third backup option on the depth chart should something happen to him. So that was more out of necessity is what I took it as. Not that they really feel that he's some valuable piece that brings a lot to the table in Charlotte. Maybe he is. I don't know. But that's how I kind of interpreted that is, hey, we kind of need our insurance policy right now because Kiro's kind of still developing in AAA. He's the next best option. Stassi's out. This is why we got to bring this guy back. So that was another interesting one I saw from this week. Now let's go to another big story of the week. Rick Hahn, though, going back to Corey Lee, one of his final moves was to trade for Corey Lee. So Rick Hahn, as bad of a general manager as he was, his last couple moves with the team actually are kind of aging pretty good early on. But Chris Getz, the next general manager, he met the media this week for the first time in like a month. And he had some pretty interesting quotes that stood out. He was asked about Garrett Crochet. He was asked about, when's the future of this team. He was asked about trading Luis Robert. He was asked about Pedro Grifol's future. So here's a couple of quotes that I pulled from that, I think it was a 26-minute press conference that stood out to me just from that press conference. I'll kind of break down what he talked about. So he was asked about Pedro Grifol's future with the team. And, kind of working, we'll set this up a little bit. What my first impression was like when you read through, and you're going to hear these quotes in a second. So I work his job during as a nighttime like reporter for ABC 17 News down here in Columbia, Missouri. So a lot of our jobs is talking to PIOs like from the police department or whatever. And the job of a PIO is basically to say a lot of words to us, but not actually tell us anything. This was something that Rick Hahn was really good at when you get these like word salad answers where he's like saying a lot, but he's not really saying anything at the same time. They don't want to actually give you information. That's kind of what stood out to me with this was Chris Getz said a whole lot, but you really have to kind of pick out certain parts and read between the lines because like he didn't really tell you anything. Now there's a few things that popped out, and so we'll read those quotes now. So he was asked about Pedro Grifol's future, and so he goes, not exactly a ringing endorsement for him. He goes, quote, Pedro and I are talking regularly, and we are trying to put our players in the best position we can for them to not only be successful this year, but in the coming years. So there's a lot of work to be done, whether it's in our major league staff or with our front office to take step forward. I know there's a lot of speculation on who is going to be in what role in future years, and it's really about showing up each day and figuring out how to put our players in the best position possible. End quote. So, not exactly a ringing endorsement. I think that kind of goes with a lot of the national reports that we've heard. My takeaway, he's probably going to be gone by the end of the year, but they don't actually plan on firing him this season just because I think they see, what good is it going to do? they also don't want to have to eat any more money than they want to. But, he didn't exactly stand by his guy when they were asking him about his future. So I think based off that, Page is probably gone during the offseason, but they will hold on to him for the rest of the year. They were also kind of asking him, like, what, fundamentals. One of the things they touted with this team coming in is like, we're going to have some improved fundamentals. We're going to be aggressive on the base pass. A lot of that has not really played out. And so they asked Getz about that as well. Like, hey, what do you think of how the team's performed based off of how you evaluating this team based off of like your expectations heading into the year? And so Getz says, quote, "The team as a whole, although the record is not very good, I think the intent and the energy playing for the White Sox and for each other, I sense a lot of positives in that. Have there been inconsistencies, whether it be fundamental breakdowns or base running or defensively or the defensive side? Yeah, that has popped up more than I would have liked." So, I mean, again, can't really take a ton out of that. But I think that's kind of code for, like, it's kind of going back to with Pedro, where they're saying we want a guy that puts our players in the best position to win. Well, you're seeing a lot of inconsistencies. Didn't sound like he was totally thrilled from that either. Now, this is where we start getting into like the more substantive answers. He was asked, when do you see this team contending? Now, remember, Jerry famously said, the reason we hired Chris Getz is because I owe it to the fans to turn this thing around quickly. And, he's been in the organization. He knows how it works, blah, blah, blah. So he got his puppet Getz in there. So they ask him, hey, like, we want to turn this thing around quickly. What's the timeline? He wouldn't exactly give a timeline. He was very vague about it. But they were also talking about, hey, like, you got some players. How are you going when managing that timeline? You got some players that are contributing right now, but could also be trade chips. How do you go about deciding whether they're part of the future? Unprompted, he brings up Dylan Cease and then kind of compares him to Garrett Crochet, or unprompted, he brings up Garrett Crochet. And then later when he was asked further about that, he kind of compared him to Dylan Cease. So here's the quote, and I thought this was very interesting. He says, being that Dylan was an attractive player to so many different organizations, I do believe it gave us a head start in regards to knowing organizations, whether that applies to Garrett or anyone else. Having a valuable player like Dylan in my first offseason as general manager has allowed me to build relationships with other general managers and to get to know other organizations. So I do feel like we're well positioned when we feel like the time is right. When it comes to Garrett, more than anything, we're focused on helping him navigate this season. He's just getting his career started as a pitcher, and he's proven to baseball and the world that he's one of the best in the game. I think I can speak to any fan out there, whether they know he's on the mound, whether it be our team or any other team, your club has a good chance to win. Now, that's kind of interesting. Again, he didn't explicitly say that, but I do think they are seriously considering moving Garrett Crochet. Now, will they do it? That's remained yet to be seen. But it was a kind of a good point they brought up because he got lucky when he took that job. He had such a good asset in Dylan Cease that all these teams were calling him. That not only that is like he kind of familiar with some of these other teams now. He's built relationships with some other GMs, but they're kind of ahead of the game as far as knowing these teams' farm systems and what they got and what they would potentially be interested in because all these teams were trying to put packages together for Dylan Cease. And Chris Getz was trying to get a good return. And it was well reported that he was very stingy as far as what he was willing to accept as far as parting ways with Dylan Cease. And I think we see early on the early returns for what they've got in that package from San Diego seem to be promising. Samuel Zavala, Thorpe kind of gets most of the headlines in that trade. Zavala's been really good. His OPS is in the 900s right now, and he's in high A ball, and he's 2 years younger than the league average age in high A ball. He's been crushing it down there. So that was a good pickup. Obviously, Thorpe had a good debut. He's looked really good in Double-A. Last start didn't go how they wanted, but the early returns from that are looking good. So that was kind of interesting to me that, hey, look, we got this asset. He wasn't really willing to commit to like, hey, we'll be ready by 2026. If you look at Beefloaf had on Twitter, he had an interesting post where he was kind of showing the White Sox core, some of the guys that he thinks are going to be part of the core moving forward, just based off the contract situation or guys that have contributed. There's really not a whole lot there like that you can build around. They're relying heavily on a lot of these prospects coming up, and as we saw the last rebuild, that prospects very hit or miss. So I don't think I'm as confident now as this is going to be a quick turnaround. I mean, I was never very confident it's going to be a quick turnaround, but that was like the message they were trying to send. I don't think that's necessarily the intent. anymore. And I think they are seriously considering trading Crochet if the package is right. Now, he did later say that about Robert too, and I'll kind of paraphrase what he said there. He's like, Robert's a really good player. We really don't have any intention of trading him. We would have to be blown away by a package. So the fact that he said that about Luis Robert, didn't really say that about Garrett Crochet, that makes me feel like they would consider moving him. But Robert looks like he's going to stay put. I would hope they don't trade Crochet. I mean, he's only going to get better. I said this last week. I'll say it again this week. I think with what they have in Crochet now, any team that's trading for him, they're buying low, because his value is only going to go up as he continues to have more and more starts and gets better and better. He's looked filthy. That's a guy that should be at the head of your rotation. It saves you from having to spend in free agency too. And that was the other thing that he kind of said in that press conference. They were asking him about like how he plans to build this thing. He's like, we'll spend money in free agency when the time is right, but we really want to build this thing from within with a lot of the pieces that we're adding and, in the farm minor leagues and the farm system. Code for, hey, we want to get as many prospects as we can because we don't want to have to spend a lot of money in free agency to patch a lot of these holes, which also makes me think it's going to take them a little bit longer than most people expect to try and contend. And really at the deadline, if you look at a lot of the pieces that they can trade, you're not getting any like franchise-changing prospects back for a lot of, like Tommy Pham. You might get like a small minor league piece that could turn into something, but you're going to have to package him with something. Eric Fetty too. Yes, he's been very good, but is it at the point where he's going to give you like 2 or 3 top 100 prospects? He might not even net you 1 top 100 prospect. We're being honest. Not that the rankings really met, but like, what are you realistically getting for him? Clevenger, as we mentioned, they're trying to trade him. He has no value. Eloy, they want to trade. Who wants to pick up that contract right now with the injury concerns? He doesn't really have a ton of value. So that's why I do think I'm a little more concerned than I was initially that Crochet, they might move him. I hope I'm wrong, but you kind of read between the tea leaves. I think they are considering. Now, that's not to say they're going to do it, but do not be surprised if they do. I think they are like looking at some of the offers some of these other teams are giving them. So, we'll see. But at least Cannon looked good this week. Corey Lee's heading in the right direction. Birmingham Barons still tearing it up. That's all we have for you this week. Another reminder, your QR code. Get yourself a shirt from Homage. Pinwheels and Ivy. Normal show coming at you tonight, 8 o'clock. Find it same place you found this show. I'll be back next week at noon. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful rest of your week.